Let's take a tour of a little chunk of my origin story. I owned that piece of land after I lived here. Front RV was mine, the back one I'm not sure where it came from. And I ended up selling it to some guy who knows if he'll ever come out here, but it's now got a squatter. So if you're watching this, guy I sold that to, who I don't even remember your name at this point, there's a squatter there now. Enjoy. Either that or he sold it to him. I don't know. But there's where the throne used to be. It'd sit there and obscured somewhat by the sagebrush, but right next to the main road here. But this is the house in the hole. Those are 5-volt panels from 1981. So when I talk about panels that I have that are 40, 50 years old that still work, those are the ones. They still work, other than the problem is now there's not enough of them to create at least 15, 20 volts to charge a 12 volt. Or to charge a 12 volt, you need about 14 volts. There's not enough panels now to do that, so these are effectively worthless. So that stove came out of a camper that I was going to put in here. It was a rotten camper that was falling down, and so we pilfered everything we could out of it. The main event here, house in the hole. So the story of this place was a friend of mine bought a 1/4 acre postage stamp from some guy in Tres Piedras, and he dug this big hole. And at first it was just one hole, and he lived in the one hole with a big canvas tarp over the top of it, and got tired of that blowing away, so he turned it into a rocks and cob sort of a primitive adobe house. Here's the hole. This is where I would try to garden when I lived here. What happened is that friend of mine struggled with mental illness, and his friends came and picked him up and took him back to his family, I guess. That used to be a Cobb pizza oven over there. It's now deteriorated. But he left and he passed this place on to me. He said, "You can have it. No, I'm not going to come back, so you can have it." So, first thing I did, well, one of the earliest things I did was a lot of plastering work. Here's some of my early plastering I did. It's now deteriorated, but it's decently hard. It was good for a first attempt and learning basically from nothing. I did not have as good of internet access when I lived here as I do now. So I was learning basically from what people were telling me how to do it. The roof on this one is still basically like the original roofs, just a canvas thing with rocks and mud and whatever to weigh it down. The original roof on this was similar, tarps and plastic and rocks and stuff to weigh it down. A lot of these blocks are aircrete. A lot of failed aircrete from my family's attempt at using aircrete to build a dome. This is the roof that we added, and it's held up better than a lot of this. But I attempted to plaster, and I also attempted to put concrete on this stuff. I didn't really understand that it's not a good idea to put concrete, but I also knew that this whole wall was trying to fall apart, and so I was just, at the time I was kind of desperate to do something to save it, and some of it's held up, but other parts of it have not held up very well. Not really sure what you could have done to make this last, but some of this is aircrete mixed in with concrete, mixed in with rocks and cob. It's several different materials that don't interface very well. And there's countless holes in the roof that snakes and stuff would get in, and this is the snake's house. I've ever told that story a million times. This is that house. There's a hole right there that stuff would get in. I used to always try to keep stuff stuffed into all the holes. I could never really get them all the way patched. But I know when my friend and his girlfriend, I say friend, I haven't talked to him in a long time. Tried to talk to him, but doesn't talk to me. But When I talked to them last, they had snakes in the hole all the time. Didn't have windows either. They started out with bottle windows. I added the windows, just basically came out of an RV and I just plastered them in there. They're not structurally reinforced or anything. They're just held in place pretty much. Very amateur, primitive construction. Is all, you know, I don't think any of us really ever knew what we were doing. I learned from some books and he learned from some books, and this was really a labor of love, and it took him a lot of effort, and he really tried hard to make it work. But, well, what I've kind of learned is that, unfortunately, in our world, if you can't basically pretend and manipulate people and lie to get what you want and pass all these obscure social rituals that are nobody ever tells you what they are. They're never spoken. Nobody's ever written them down. But if you don't know what they are, you're kind of screwed. And if you're not born with them innately embedded in you, like myself and many others who have lived out here, it's almost impossible to succeed in the world because you don't have the weird rituals built into your brain that everybody uses to manipulate each other and lie to each other and convince each other to give them what they want. In other words, if you're not a good liar, you end up in a place like this. Let's take a tour of the inside, though. Here's the inside. This little space I would use as a shower sometimes. Sometimes I used it as a wardrobe. It had many different purposes. It never had a specific set purpose. I gotta be careful because there may be snakes up in the roof, so I gotta make sure I don't get messed up. Here's the bedroom, the sleeping pod, as my friend would call it. Still some of my bedding left here, and bottle windows. And that hole used to be a stovepipe. I put a screen in it, a piece of screen material, and then I would stuff it with fabric in the winter. I did live here through winters. This is nice because it would get up over 100 on the surface and it'd still be 70 degrees in here without any climate control. But the winters were tough. It wasn't particularly warm. Here's the kitchen. You can see all the windows are up at ground level. You can't really have them any lower than they are. This used to be a cob stove. By the way, this is my second attempt at plastering. You could see it went a lot better. I tried to dye it too. If I had just kept making plaster like this, I could have made this whole thing nice. The problem was this plaster took so much labor to make. It was like 3 days to make this little area enough plaster to cover it. It's crazy. Here's the stove. So this used to be a cob stove that would leak a bunch of smoke into the environment. My friend and his girlfriend, who still try to stay in touch with, they both would come over and come over covered in soot. And it's because this thing would leak so much smoke into the environment. You can see everything in here is covered in soot. So I went through the roof and just installed a stovepipe, and this would leak, but it worked better than having a, cob stove that just didn't quite work right. Didn't have a good draft to it was the main problem, I think. There's nothing to pull the smoke out. Just about any stove will leak if it doesn't have a good draft. They're all, none of them are made airtight, really, especially as they get older and they expand and contract. They just have countless leaks in them, and eventually they become sort of worthless. So you have to have a good draft to pull the smoke out. This bucket, I remember filling it with flammable stuff and basically having a little fire going in here to try to smoke the snakes out. That didn't really work. So much effort went into this. So much time. I miss it. I do. But I also don't at the same time. As my friend group kind of dwindles, as I've chosen to take the path of saying the truth regardless if it might hurt, I recognize that, again, you kind of have to make it on your own if you don't abide by the rules. It's unfortunate. And it's damn near impossible to make it on your own. It's kind of like a prison sentence or a death sentence. We are social creatures after all. But here I am, coming around full circle, visiting the Mesa again. Very few friends. Not really a place in society or anything to do. Just kind of lost. But that's that. I hope this wasn't too gloomy, but it's a little bit difficult for me to look at this, and there's a lot of painful memories that go with this stuff. Maybe one day it'll become a positive footnote. I still miss it, I still regard the Mesa as my true home, my hometown, my place where I belong, but doesn't mean it's a nice place. All right. Well, thank you all for watching. I appreciate everyone. And maybe I'll see you around, huh?